How do you decide when you're finished with a game? That you've done everything you want to do and are ready to move on to the next one? For me, and I imagine a lot of others, the obvious answer is hitting the end credits. Occasionally, I will have the terrible idea to go for all the achievements, but typically, once the credits roll, I'm done playing the game, regardless of whether or not there are more things I could do. While credits seem like a formality, there's a fair amount of mechanical power to them. They provide a moment of reflection to look back at what you just played, and they signal that you've completed the main content of a game, the stuff the developers viewed as the core experience. Hitting the end credits provides that sweet sense of satisfaction that comes from accomplishment, and seeing them roll always gives me a nice final hit of dopamine. However, the sense of finality that comes with end credits makes it really hard for me to jump back into a game. Leveling up and getting new abilities feels great when it's helping me progress to that main goal of taking out the final boss or solving some grand mystery, but once that goal is reached, I don't see the point in doing that stuff. When I don't have something I'm working towards, progression systems become meaningless. Like, yeah, I can do all these quests to get a cool weapon, but why do I need it if I've already accomplished what the developers wanted me to accomplish? As my motivation stems from the desire to beat a title, continuing after doing so always feels hollow. And look, I'm sure a lot of people are able to find motivation in just having fun with the game instead of needing to work towards some goal. And there are also lots of folks who find tons of value in how much extra content a game has. And, you know, good for them. But I'm not built that way. I need to be working towards something greater. For the most part, I'm fine with not having the drive to continue with a game after beating it, especially with more story-centric titles. There isn't even that much to do after the credits roll except play it again. So more often than not, I don't feel like I miss out on all that much. But sometimes games introduce important content after the credits roll, and I always struggle with how to approach it. Most recently, this came up with Pokemon Legends Arceus. After the end credits, players are given an entire new quest line centered around capturing various legendary Pokemon. Out of all the story missions in Arceus, about a third of them happen post-credits. And while not every mission takes the same amount of time to complete, this still makes up a huge chunk of the game. Between those missions and filling out the Pokedex, players could easily spend more time with endgame content than the actual game itself. Of course, as I'm sure you already can tell, I didn't do any of that stuff. There were new things to progress towards, but they didn't feel as important as what I had already completed. This sort of thing isn't inherently bad. Having a substantial amount of post-game content give those who adore a title more time with it, and those who have enjoyed it but are reaching their limit an easy out where they can stop playing yet not feel like they've left the game unfinished. It is understandable why the developers approached it in this way, and I'm not positive they were wrong to format it like this, especially given the fact that the game is designed with kids in mind, many of whom may not have the attention span to beat a 50-hour game but can manage something shorter. It's also possible that the gameplay of the post-game is designed with a more niche audience in mind, and if they had made that content a part of the main game, it would have alienated a large portion of players by making the core of the game feel like too much of a slog. Nevertheless, the choice to place it where they did led to me and players like me who are motivated most by beating a game to miss out on some content, which is a bit of a shame as I have heard from multiple people that the endgame of Arceus contains some of the most interesting story beats and moments in the game. Regardless of whether or not it was the right choice for Pokemon Legends Arceus to roll credits when they did, it does highlight how the placement of the credits can influence player behavior and satisfaction. As it defines the core experience most players will have, developers have to be cognizant of what they want that experience to entail. Take Slowclap's Kung Fu beat-em-up, Sifu. The game consists of 5 levels for the player to work through, where they will take on hordes of enemies and tough-as-nails boss fights, both of which take considerable skill to overcome. Sifu's difficulty revolves around its resurrection mechanic, where every time the player character dies, they get older, and once they hit a certain age, they can no longer be revived and the player needs to restart the level. On a first playthrough, this will mean replaying each level over and over again to master the mechanics and finish at the lowest age possible, which is easier said than done. While playing, there were times I thought I'd never be good enough to get to the final boss at a reasonable age, but I kept trying and kept getting better, and after enough practice, I was able to not only get to the final boss, but also beat him. I felt that sense of pride and relief that comes from finishing a hard game. However, and I'll be as non-specific as possible so I don't spoil anything, right at the moment I expected the credits to roll, a cutscene played instead that indicated there was a slightly different way to approach each of the levels, and then it set me back to the start again. Even though the story hit a natural and satisfying conclusion, due to the credits not rolling, I felt like I needed to keep playing. So I jumped right back in and went through all the levels again. This time, instead of struggling for the slightest bit of progress, I used everything I had learned from the countless times I had gone through the levels before and beat all of them with ease. After dominating the final boss, I felt like a gamer god. And then I was finally met with the credits. The true ending of Sifu feels like the sort of thing that would normally be optional post-game content, there for dedicated players who want an additional challenge, but easily skippable for those not interested. However, by holding off on the credits, Slow Clap made it a part of the core experience. As the credits rolled, I knew with complete certainty that had they come after beating the final boss for the first time, I would not have kept playing to see the true ending. And that would have sucked, because I would have missed out on the amazing experience of witnessing how far I had come as a player. To be honest, until this experience with Sifu, I never spent much time thinking about how motivated I am by reaching a game's end credits, but now I can't stop thinking about it. And I find myself questioning whether or not I would have stuck with certain titles if their credits had rolled earlier. Like, would I have kept playing Hades had I seen the credits after the first time I beat the final boss instead of the 10th? Would I have played the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2 if they had separated it from the main game? Would I have searched for more endings in the Stanley Parable if there had been credits after every single one instead of just the not Stanley ending? As these are all games I really cherish, I'd like to think that I would have continued with each of them, but given my track record, it doesn't look great. Ultimately, where to place the end credits ties into one of the great challenges of game design, determining which parts of a title should be mandatory and which should be optional. And as it turns out, there isn't an easy answer. If developers opt to make most content in a title mandatory, it could throw off the pacing, leading to a lot of bloat. Also, especially with less linear titles, if nearly everything is mandatory, it may take away some of the joy that comes with exploration. There is something special about uncovering secrets, of finding things that not everyone will find. It rewards curious players with new things to encounter and creates experiences unique to their playthrough. Of course, the downside to not making things mandatory is that a portion of players will miss these things, and sometimes they may be an important part of what makes a game great. For instance, let's look at the ending of Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is a massive game with tons of secrets, from items to bosses to entire areas. On my first playthrough, I did some of the optional stuff, but was more focused on beating the game than anything else. So once I beat what I thought was the final boss and got to the end credits, I stopped playing. At the time, I knew there were more things I could explore as I hadn't cleared the map, but I didn't really know what those things entailed. A lot of it centered around collecting enough essence to improve the Dream Nail, which seemed a bit tedious. I had already gotten my dopamine hit and didn't want to tarnish that, so I convinced myself that whatever was left wasn't worth my time because I was able to beat the game without it. And while I do think that the Hollow Knight ending is fine, it doesn't hold a candle to the true ending. The real final boss, along with the steps it takes to get there, contains some of the most enjoyable and iconic moments in the game. When I went back to replay it last year and finally did everything, it launched Hollow Knight from being just a title I enjoyed to one that sits firmly in my top 5. The thing is, I wouldn't have known that there was more worth doing if people hadn't told me. Obviously, I understand that a lot of blame for that is on me for not exploring or being observant enough, but with optional content in games, it can be hard to know what will and won't be worth my time. Many titles throw out a slew of collectibles that don't amount to much, so when something feels that way, I pull back. And I can't help but wonder if I would have sought out the true ending in my first playthrough if instead of rolling credits after beating the Hollow Knight, it had given me a message like, "Yet the dream continues," and then set me back in Dirtmouth. It's hard to know for sure, but given the fact that I'm so motivated by hitting the end credits, I think that would have been enough to get me to do the things I was reluctant to do in the first place. And with this, I find myself conflicted, because on one hand, I think experiencing the true ending is essential to fully understanding and appreciating Hollow Knight. But on the other, I think part of what makes it special for so many players is that it was something they earned through their own curiosity without the game telling them they needed to do it. Withholding the credits in an effort to incentivize players who didn't do everything into pursuing the true ending could cheapen that feeling for those who didn't need the push. Of course, I suspect a fair amount of people only learned about the existence absence of an alternate ending from external sources, which isn't ideal either, and that ends up being one of the big problems. As a player, it's difficult to know what optional content is worth doing, especially when part of what makes it worthwhile is the joy of discovering that it was worthwhile. I think I've just been conditioned over the years to assume that a lot of optional tasks won't have that special of a payoff, and the challenge is primarily there for folks who enjoy 100%ing every game they play. Operating under that assumption does lead to me missing important things, but it also protects my time, which I don't have enough of. All this is tough to sort out, and I find myself feeling pretty conflicted about it. Like, I think there is something intriguing about a game whose designers seem unconcerned with whether or not every player who beats it experiences its best content. But also, it seems like a terrible idea for designers not to do everything in their power to get players to engage with the most important parts of their title. And I've never felt more conflicted about this than I did after playing Nier Automata. Nier Automata is a game that doesn't really begin until it ends. I would go as far to say that if you've only played through it once, you haven't really played it. And this seems to be a pretty commonly held opinion, as when I mentioned on Twitter that I was finally playing it, I got tons of responses telling me that I needed to beat it more than once. The first playthrough is satisfying enough, and it does feel like a complete game. Depending on how much you do, it will probably take anywhere from 10 to 30 hours to beat, and while parts of the narrative will feel a bit incomplete, the story is serviceable. However, seeing what really makes Automata special requires playing through it multiple times. The issue is that the game doesn't do the best job of making it clear that players should. After the end of the first credits, it does encourage players to do another playthrough with a message from the development team saying there are new perspectives to explore and story beats to see, but to be honest, if I hadn't been told beforehand that I needed to beat it multiple times, this would have felt pretty close to when you beat a Mario game and it tells you you can now play as Luigi. A reason for some players to come back, but not one for me. This is amplified by the fact that the second playthrough is very similar to the first, so it isn't immediately obvious that it's worthwhile to continue. I was curious about how many players reached the true ending, so I looked at achievement and trophy stats from Steam, Xbox, and PlayStation to get an idea. And consistently across all three platforms, out of the players who finished ending A, less than half of them reached the final credits, with the biggest drop-off happening between ending A and ending B, which lost about a third of those players. It's a bit mind-boggling to me that so many people have technically finished the game, but will have a fundamentally different understanding of its stories, characters, and themes than those who reach the actual final credits. They truly are two different experiences. Honestly, putting that much important content behind a credit roll is wild, and it's hard not to think it's a bad idea. In fairness, many folks in the target demographic for Nier Automata would be familiar with the game's director, Yoko Taro, so at least at launch, a large chunk of players would have been aware that this is how every game he makes operates. However, especially when a game is that critically acclaimed, there's going to be people going in without that knowledge. And for them, some of the most important stuff of the game would be so easy to miss. Had there been no credits after ending A, I imagine more people would have kept playing and eventually reached the final credits. Of course, the fact that so much of the game is hidden behind a credit roll is part of what makes it interesting. It breaks down typical game conventions, and I won't get into specifics as to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, but it does some unique things with its various credit rolls that justify there being so many of them. Also, based on what I know about Yoko Taro, I don't think he cares whether or not people stop playing his games because they can't get on board with his creative direction. He seemingly makes titles he wants to make, and would rather do something interesting that loses people than compromise his vision, which is hard not to respect. It's also worth noting that what I view as the intended or optimal way to experience a game almost certainly is not universal. There are surely players who loved ending A but hated every playthrough after that, who adored Hollow Knight up until they got to the White Palace, and who resented having to play through Sifu an additional time to get the credits to roll. At the end of the day, when it comes to determining what to make optional versus what to make mandatory, developers are deciding between presenting that content in a way that will make it more likely for every player to experience it, even though it may not appeal to all of them, or presenting it in a way that will lead to fewer folks engaging with it, but those who do will be far more likely to enjoy it, as they're the type of players who search for that kind of thing. And I find myself not really knowing what the right answer to all of this is. To be honest, when I started writing this script, I firmly believed that most games, especially ones with important optional content like Hollow Knight and Nier Automata, would benefit from delaying their credit rolls. At the very least, this sort of thing would be good for me and players like me, as it would make it more clear that I should engage with certain aspects of a title. However, as I got further into actually writing the script, it became hard to shake the idea that there is value in being able to miss something. It makes it a mystery that people have to work towards, whether it be on their own or as a community, and it rewards players with something substantial for their effort. Effort not every player wants to put in. So yes, there is value to Sifu's approach of making players prove they have mastered the game to be rewarded with the credits. But there is also value in titles that withhold their most important moments and only share them with those willing to look. With every game though, there should be a purpose behind the choice of where to place the credits. Where a title like Nier Automata aims to say something with its structure, one like Pokemon Arceus seemingly just wanted to have a lot of post-game content and made a short-sighted decision by placing important story moments after the credits. Frankly, I wish I was the kind of player who's driven to find every secret in a game in the hopes that it will lead to something incredible, but I'm not. And I expect that I'll still stop playing games after seeing the end credits. It's just who I am. So while I do hope to see more titles find ways to push me to engage with content I'd probably enjoy but am likely to miss, with most titles I'll have to keep relying on people on Twitter telling me what I should and shouldn't pursue in them. As odd as it may sound, I could talk about end credits all day. They're an aspect that we often look at as separate from the game itself, but it can have such a huge impact on pacing and presentation. In fact, this script originally was far longer and talked way more in depth about certain end credits, but I realized that a lot of what I had was less about when to roll them and more about credit sequences I really liked. So I decided to take the stuff I cut from this script and create an extra video about my favorite credit sequences in video games that you can watch right now on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service made and owned by creators, me being one of them. It gives us a place to post our work without worrying about demonetization or the algorithm, and it gives viewers a place to watch some of the best creators out there, all ad-free. With pretty much every script I write, I end up cutting a lot of interesting ideas that don't fit the topic, and more often than not, I never do anything with them because I don't have time to, and they don't make all that much sense to post on my main channel. But with the help of Nebula, I was able to get this one made, which is awesome. And yes, that video will talk more extensively about Nier Automata if that interests you. What's even better is that we partnered with this video sponsor, CuriosityStream, in order to give you what is honestly one of the best deals on the internet. Right now, if you sign up for CuriosityStream, you not only get access to thousands of incredible documentaries on their site, but you also get a free membership to Nebula for as long as you're signed up with CuriosityStream. Currently, you can get 26% off by clicking the link in the description, which comes out to less than $15 for the year. On its own, CuriosityStream is great. Its library is ever expanding, and there are good documentaries on pretty much every topic you could imagine. I really like watching nature documentaries because I don't go outside much, and I recently watched an interesting series about Yellowstone and its various oddities that I definitely recommend checking out. For less than $15 a year, you can get all the great stuff on CuriosityStream, as well as an extra video from me over on Nebula. It's an incredible deal that helps out me and all the creators on Nebula a fair bit, so give it a look. Anyway, thanks again to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this video. For those still watching, sup. Thank you to all my patrons who make this channel possible. You make my life so much easier, and I appreciate you very much. And a special shout out to William Glenn 8 for being an honorary bagbuten. That's it. That's the video. Have a good day and or night, and I'll see you in the next one.